Join us on gripping horror as we delve into the infamous diving spot called the Pool of Death, renowned for claiming the lives of 21 divers. The frigid water temperature and the extreme depth pose significant challenges for divers, leading to a substantial number of drowning incidents and even cases of heart attacks. The number of fatalities at the quarry could have been much higher, considering the numerous close calls and fortunate escapes that have occurred. Dorothea Quarry itself is not fundamentally dangerous. The problem arises from the lack of regulation, which leads divers to attempt things beyond their capabilities. Over the years, numerous harrowing accounts have surfaced of divers pushing their limits to the point of exhaustion. Subsequently, these divers have become incapable of recovering and ascending to the surface. Furthermore, the fact that some individuals are diving as deep as 100 meters on air, despite the accepted limit being 50 meters, says a lot about the lack of awareness and responsibility among some of these divers. These are the harrowing accounts of Paula Blakemore, Jason Dean, and John Edward, and the tragedies that befell them at Dorothea Quarry. Dorothea Quarry has a rich history, dating back to the early 1820s, when it was first leased by William Turner and named Clodford Turner. Later, the quarry was renamed Dorothy by Turner's son in 1829, who was the manager at the time. The quarry was the largest in the area and employed up to 200 men, producing 5,000 to 6,000 tons of slate annually. However, profits began to decline in the 1840s, leading to the quarry's sale in 1848. A group of quarrymen purchased Dorothy and renewed the lease in 1851. Production peaked in 1872, with 17,442 tons produced, and the most profitable year was 1875, generating £14,738, or equivalent to £1.5 million today. By the 1930s, over 350 men were employed at the quarry. However, production dropped after the start of World War II, and the quarry eventually closed in 1970. As stated previously, despite the official ban on diving in the Dorothea Quarry and the lack of provided facilities, the site has become a popular destination for diving since quarrying ended in 1970. However, the unregulated nature of the site and its depth have led some divers to overestimate their abilities. As a result, in the decade between 1994 and 2004, 21 divers lost their lives in the quarry. Located in the Nantal Valley region of North Wales, the Dorothea Quarry is an abandoned slate quarry that spans a vast area near the village of Taliesin and contains 3 flooded deep lakes. With a maximum depth of 106 meters, or 348 feet, the Dorothea Quarry is not only expansive, but also extremely deep. Not to mention there are several deep sections within it, including sections with floors at 25 meters, or 82 feet, 40 meters, or 131 feet, and even deeper. The quarry boasts many remnants of its past, such as old huts, cranes, cables, and tunnel sections. In addition, there is a car stack located on the west side of the quarry, not shown on the maps, where numerous cars have been discarded and piled on top of one another over time. The deeper you venture into the quarry, the older the cars become. Some of the tunnels in the quarry are accessible and lead through outcrops and ridges. The shallowest section near the car park is useful as a deco loop to swim around in while finishing a dive. During the summer months, the water in Dorothea Quarry is affected by severe algae blooms near the surface. However, the water clears up beyond approximately 15 meters or 49 feet. Due to this phenomenon, Dorothea remains dark throughout the year, and other than on the surface, the water in the quarry is excruciatingly cold, especially in the winter. Paula Blakemore had always been passionate about diving. She loved the feeling of weightlessness, the quietness of the underwater world, and the freedom that came with exploring it. So, when her friend Jeff Keep suggested they start a diving club together in 2001, she jumped at the opportunity. The two of them founded New Frontier Diving Limited, which was based at Paula's home on Longdown Road in Congleton, England. They offered diving courses and training to students from all over Greater Manchester, and Paula was the lead instructor. She loved teaching others how to dive and sharing her passion with them. One of her many students stated, she conducted and instructed the course in a professional yet friendly manner. Paula made the course interesting, fun, and as always, drilled in the safety aspects. Another former pupil added, I was immediately impressed by her genuine warmth and enthusiasm for diving, whether it be teaching courses or doing some serious diving for fun. I expected to find the skills tough, but Paula was very flexible in her approach, and we all managed to master the skills required. Paula loved teaching, but her true passion was deep wreck diving, which only grew after completing her rebreather course. Paula Blakemore, now age 43, had always been an adventurer at heart. She loved the feeling of exploring new places, whether on land or underwater. Her love for adventure only grew after meeting her husband Mike Blakemore, who was also a diver, was a perfect match for Paula. They had been married for 19 years, and their love for adventure only brought them closer together. Paula especially loved the thrill of exploring sunken ships and discovering the secrets they held. Every weekend of the year, Paula would dive with her husband, her close friend Jeff Keep, or other team members. They spent hours underwater, searching for new wrecks to explore and studying the marine life that surrounded them. One day, Paula heard about a quarry in Wales called Dorothea that was rumoured to hold the wreckage of old huts and quarry workings remaining such as cranes, cables, and tunnel sections, and she knew she had to explore it. This quarry had pulled divers in with its mystery for decades, and Paula was no exception. Unfortunately for Paula, her excitement was short-lived. As seen, Dorothea Quarry was very unforgiving to divers, and Paula was about to discover this for herself. Paula and her dive buddy Graham Owen arrived at Dorothea Quarry on March the 15th, 2007, eager to explore its depths. Paula was not only satisfying her own desire for adventure, but also practicing for an upcoming charity dive for guide dogs for the blind. Meanwhile, her husband Mike was completing a dive in the same quarry that day as she arrived. The water was cold and dark, but she was determined as she loved nothing more than diving. As Paula and Graham descended into the water, they were filled with excitement and anticipation. They had heard about the quarry's reputation for being a challenging and dangerous dive site, but they were confident in their abilities and eager to explore. The quarry's murky waters made it difficult to see, and the jagged rocks and submerged debris made navigation treacherous. What happens next can be described as a series of unfortunate events. As Graham and Paula descended following a line from a marker buoy, both of them were a bit nasally, and after about 6 meters, or 20 feet, Graham signaled to abort the dive due to difficulty clearing his ears. It was then they noticed that there was a problem with Paula's rebreather. A valve diaphragm had ruptured. Paula had just been above Graham, but then she vanished, and Graham saw the marker buoy sinking past him at a rapid rate. Graham quickly realized that Paula was in trouble and started following the trail of bubbles she left behind as she descended deeper and deeper. He eventually found her clinging to a ridge as she reached 40 meters, or 131 feet below the surface. Paula clinged for dear life in a desperate attempt to stop her descent. Graham saw the rope of the marker buoy tangled around her left leg that was the result of her rapid descent. Graham tried to pull the rope off her foot, but it was stuck, and he could not move it. Paula was breathing using Graham's equipment as her faulty valve stopped her rebreather from functioning, but she was getting tired as she continued to fight to get free. The situation only grew more dire. Graham began to become tangled in the rope himself as he tried to save her. Thankfully, Graham was able to free his legs, But as a result of his vicious movements, Graham was disorientated for a time after. When he came back to his senses, he realized Paula had disappeared again, and Graham couldn't find any bubbles. Despite his best efforts, Graham had to surface without Paula. He was devastated, knowing that she was still down there. Now back on the surface, Graham sounded the alarm and began contacting emergency services. As the search began, Graham was airlifted to hospital in Bangor as he needed treatment due to the speed he had resurfaced after trying to save her, which resulted in the bends. Paula's husband, Mike, was finishing a dive and had clambered out of the water when the alarm was raised. He helplessly stood by with their 3 daughters, having taken the heartbreaking decision to tell other divers on site not to risk their lives by trying to rescue his wife, because he knew she had sunk too deep. After losing contact, Paula would have lasted only a few seconds. The North Wales police were notified, and they launched a search for Paula. Police divers were called in to search the quarry, hoping to find any clues that could lead them to her. Days passed, and the search continued. The divers endlessly searched the quarry from end to end, but they were unable to find any sign of Paula. To make matters worse, efforts to recover her body were hampered by the depth of the water in the quarry and debris below the surface, but they refused to give up. Finally, after days of searching, the police divers decided to bring in an underwater robot to help them search the quarry more thoroughly. The robot was state-of-the-art, equipped with the latest sensors and cameras. It was able to search Dorothea in places that the divers couldn't reach, and it gave them a new hope in their search for Paula. Thankfully, 3 days after the search began, the rescue team discovered a tunnel located 300 feet beneath the surface and found Paula trapped inside. The tunnel was narrow and dangerous, with sharp rocks and poor visibility making it treacherous for even the most experienced divers. It was a grueling and exhausting journey, but finally they emerged from the water, and her body was gently laid in a body bag on site. Those who knew Paula would always remember her as a brave and passionate diver who had lived life to the fullest, even in the face of danger. Her husband went on to say, "I'm numb. She was such a good diver, and I just can't believe this has happened to her." It's a tragic reality that Dorothy's waters have claimed many lives over the years, and Paula's tragic fate serves as yet another grim reminder of the dangers of being trapped beneath its water's surface. Gates have been locked and boulders and machinery placed in the way, but despite this, many divers still feel compelled to test their limits and explore the depths of this mysterious and deadly place. The search for answers and the allure of the unknown continue to draw people in, even as the risks remain ever present. As the diving community continues to grapple with the dangers of Dorothy, we can only hope that measures will be taken to ensure the safety of those who choose to explore its depths. But for now, the war between divers and Dorothy rages on, and the outcome remains uncertain. Jason Dean, aged 31, was a civil engineer in Liverpool, England, who had always been passionate about his work. He loved the challenge of designing and building structures that would stand the test of time, and he was dedicated to ensuring that every project he worked on was a success. Everyone who knew Jason admired him for his clear-headedness, his ability to take on any challenge, and his infectious energy. He was always the life of the party, and he had a way of making everyone feel at ease in his presence. Despite his love for his job, Jason was also a free spirit who loved to explore the world around him. He had always been one to push himself to new heights, both professionally and personally. Jason's taste for adventure started in the Scouts and became a passion that took him around the world. He learned to dive in Malawi, West Africa, and was a keen mountain climber. And in 1998, he decided to take on one of his biggest challenges yet, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for the Roy Castle lung cancer appeal. It was no small feat, but Jason was determined to see it through. He spent months preparing for the climb, training his body and mind to withstand the grueling conditions he would face on the mountain. After days of climbing and struggling, he reached the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Jason, but for everyone who had supported him and the Roy Castle lung cancer appeal. And it was just one of many adventures that Jason would take on over the years. In 2002, he climbed the Palador Peak in the Himalayas, another feat that tested his strength and determination. But no matter where his adventures took him, Jason remained a free spirit, always pushing himself to new heights and inspiring others to do the same. Next off his bucket list was diving the Dorothea Quarry, but not even Jason could have been prepared for the challenges he would face. Despite his experience as an adventurer, diving in the Dorothea Quarry proved to be one of the most difficult and dangerous undertakings of his life. Jason arrived at Dorothea Quarry on the 21st of March 2004. Jason was one of a group of 5 divers from Wirral who planned to dive about 30 to 35 metres, or about 115 feet. The group had originally intended to dive off the Welsh coast of Anglesey, but were forced to cancel because of the bad weather. Once at the quarry, they split into 2 groups, Jason going diving with a close friend, Matthew McNeil, while 3 others went diving in another part of the quarry. They all intended to dive no more than 30 minutes to minimise the possibility of any risks. As they descended into the murky waters of the Dorothea Quarry, Jason and Matthew kept in close communication, checking on each other's gear and making sure they were safe. But as they reached a halfway depth of their intended dive, something went wrong with his equipment. Matthew and Jason had been swimming towards an area of the quarry at a depth of around 50 feet, when Jason signalled that he wanted to surface. Matthew was immediately concerned, knowing that something must either be wrong with Jason or his equipment. Wanting to ensure the life of his friend, the pair decided to turn back. During their ascent, Matthew realised they were ascending too quickly, signalling to Jason to slow down. At this point, Jason did not appear to be panicking, but in the murky waters of the quarry, it was difficult to communicate effectively, and it's unclear whether Jason had understood the signal. They managed and were now approaching their stop. During the decompression stop, Jason had difficulties maintaining buoyancy. Then, suddenly, in the blink of an eye, similar to Paula's case, Jason began sinking rapidly without warning, and Matthew had no time to react or figure out the cause. Jason was frantically trying to sort things out as he was all over the place. He desperately tried, but failed to fit a spare regulator. Jason was chucking air like a jacuzzi. He was not normally a panicker. Instead of getting better, things got worse. Matthew tried to put air in Jason's dive jacket to help him ascend, but he kept knocking it. Jason was breathing very, very fast. The panic in his eyes was awful. It was out of character. Matthew inflated his own jacket, but it separated both of them quite rapidly. Matthew was trying to get Jason sorted, but couldn't do that because Jason kept panicking. Then Jason let go of him, and he let go of Jason. Matthew descended quickly to try and catch up with Jason, but it was already too late. Jason was sinking faster than he could swim, and at this point there was no way of reaching him without endangering his own life. Matthew was starting to get the bends. Defeated, he returned to the surface to initiate rescue operations. The other members of the diving group had heard his distress signals and frantically rushed back to the surface. Similar to Paula's story, North Wales police divers arrived on the scene promptly and set up their high-tech robots to scour the depths of Dorothea. Thankfully, due to the North Wales police robot mini-submarine, they were able to locate Jason's body that same day at 4 p.m, floating on a ledge at a depth of about 40 metres, or 131 feet, with his regulator out of his mouth. A police spokesman confirmed his family had been informed, and a post-mortem examination was due to be carried out at Ysbyty Gwynedd that same day. Jason's death had been the 7th death in the quarry over the year, and locals were calling for stricter controls over Dorothea. His death was revealed to be caused by drowning due to equipment failure. The reason why Jason did not remove his weight belt has always been a mystery to other divers. It is widely believed that this simple precaution could have potentially saved his life, by stopping his rapid descent. Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that he could have done more and felt a deep sense of survivor's guilt. But despite his pain, Matthew found solace in the memories of his friend and in the knowledge that Jason had lived his life to the fullest, always seeking out new challenges and adventures. And he resolved to honor Jason's memory by continuing to explore and push his own limits, always with a deep respect for the risks and dangers of the world of adventure. This next story took the sub-aqua community by shock, but as seen many times before, the depths of Dorothy does not discriminate its victims. John Edward Hebbard, aged 53, of Charminster Close, Great Sankey, was a man of adventure. As a father of two, John had a deep sense of responsibility towards his family, always making sure to be as safe as possible, but he never let that stop him from pursuing his passions. John had completed over 1,000 dives in his lifetime and was a former member of the Warrington Sub-Aqua Club. He had explored some of the most beautiful and challenging dive sites around the world, and he had always done so with a sense of joy and wonder. But earlier this year, tragedy struck. John was involved in a motorcycle accident that left him with several broken bones and a long road to recovery. The accident was a wake-up call for John, and as he recovered from his injuries, John started to reflect on his life and his priorities. He started spending more time with his wife and children, but he could never get rid of that severe itch for adventure. He knew that he needed to find a way to balance his passions with his responsibilities, and he started to plan for his next dive. John dove 2 years ago in the southern Red Sea as part of a group of 16. It had been an unforgettable experience for him, and wanting to relive that experience, John had a second expedition planned to the Red Sea in January, and he was determined to be ready for it. Fully aware of the dangers that lurked in the Red Sea, including strong currents and hazardous conditions, John, being a meticulous and cautious diver, recognized the importance of being in top form before exploring its depths. With this in mind, he opted to train at the Dorothea Quarry, honing his skills and preparing himself for the upcoming dive. On December the 20th, 2003, John and his buddy diver arrived at Dorothea Quarry. As it was winter, the waters were exceptionally cold, posing a challenge for even the most experienced divers. Given John's recent motorcycle accident, coping with the frigid temperatures would be an additional hurdle for him to overcome. Nevertheless, they donned their wetsuits and gear and descended into the icy waters, determined to explore the old quarry workings and practice for his upcoming dive. The cold water proved to be an immediate shock to John's body, and he struggled to maintain his buoyancy as they swam deeper into the quarry. Regardless of the warning signs, they continued on and finally reached the car stack located deep in the west side of the quarry. Now satisfied, the pair signaled to each other and began their ascent back to the surface. And as the water was extremely cold, they knew it would be best to exit the quarry immediately, as they had been diving for around 45 minutes at this point. As they began swimming up, John's buddy diver noticed that he was struggling. The freezing water had made his movement sluggish and difficult to read. Unbeknownst to his buddy diver, John had suffered a heart attack due to the extreme cold of the water. He gripped his chest with extreme panic in his eyes. Unfortunately for John, the heart attack occurred in the worst possible place, 40 meters or 131 feet from the surface in the deep, dark and cold depths of Dorothy, causing him to rapidly lose consciousness from the shock. Despite his buddy diver's valiant efforts to bring him to the surface, John's lifeless body proved too heavy to lift alone. In a desperate attempt to save John, his buddy diver watched in horror as John slowly sank back into the depths of Dorothy, disappearing from sight. Left with no other options, his buddy diver quickly swam to the surface to initiate rescue operations. The frigid winter waters hit him with brutal force, but he battled through the pain, driven by the urgent need to save his friend. He called for help just after 1:15 in the afternoon, and within minutes, a team of divers arrived on the scene. The response for their swift response was that the rescue operations were already on standby due to the high number of recent deaths that had occurred at the quarry in the past year. Due to the prompt response of the rescue divers, they were able to reach John just in time before he sunk to the deep. The North Wales police divers frantically brought John's lifeless body to the surface, still holding on to the small glimmer of hope that he could still be alive. The rescue team promptly put John in the air ambulance and rushed him to Ysbyty Gwynedd Hospital. But, despite their best efforts, John was pronounced dead on arrival. To compound the tragedy, the buddy diver suffered from the bends, a painful and potentially fatal condition caused by his rapid ascent to the surface. He was promptly airlifted to a specialist decompression chamber on the Wirral for urgent treatment, and thankfully, he managed to survive. Once again, as seen many times in cave diving, tragedy can strike at any time for those who dare to venture into the depths of the underwater world. Dorothea Quarry remains as a sober reminder of the risks involved in such endeavours. It highlights that even the most experienced and skilled divers can fall victim to the hazards of the deep, and that safety should always be the top priority when embarking on such adventures. May Paula, Jason, and John rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.